The wind came first, like it always did in Dry Creek, carrying dust devils across the main street and rattling the shutters of the Silver Star Saloon. It was the kind of wind that made folks think of ghosts, of debts unpaid, of bullets fired in anger that never quite settled into the earth. Sarah McKenna stood on the porch of her weathered homestead, her calloused hands gripping the rail as she watched the horizon swallow the sun. 17 years had passed since the day that split her life clean in two, the day her husband, Thomas McKenna, was gunned down in the street by a man whose face she'd never seen. Only a name whispered through the crowd that terrible afternoon: Wade Hollister. The killer had fled before the marshal could string together a posse, left behind nothing but blood in the dirt and a widow with no future. But he'd left something else, too. Something Sarah had found 3 days later, shivering and half-starved in the hayloft of her barn. A boy. Couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with eyes like river stones and a bullet graze across his shoulder that had gone septic. She should have turned him in. Should have let the law deal with Wade Hollister's son, this trembling remnant of her husband's killer. But when she'd lit the lantern and seen those fever-bright eyes staring up at her, not with defiance, but with the hollow desperation of a creature that expected nothing but cruelty from the world, something in her chest had cracked open. "You got a name?" she'd asked. "Jesse," the boy had whispered. "Jesse Hollister." The name should have turned her blood to ice. Instead, she'd fetched water and clean cloth, and by morning's light, she'd made a choice that the town would never forgive, and she'd never fully understand. She raised him. Through the years of suspicious stares and cruel whispers, through the Sunday sermons that painted her as a fool or worse, through the nights when she'd wake to find Jesse sitting at the window, watching the road as if his father's ghost might come riding back, she raised him. Taught him to read from Thomas's old books, to mend fence and break horses, to shoot straight and speak true. She gave him the only thing she had left to give, a chance. And Jesse grew tall and lean and quiet, with his father's dark hair and something else, something Sarah recognized in the way he'd pause before stepping through a doorway, in the way his hand would drift toward his hip when a stranger rode into town. He carried his father's violence in his blood, like original sin, but he also carried something else: gentleness with the horses, patience with the difficult work. And in his eyes, when he looked at Sarah, there lived a devotion so fierce it frightened her. "I know what I am," he'd told her once on his 16th birthday, as they'd sat on the porch watching the same wind that blew tonight. "I know what he did, what you lost." "You're not your father's sins, Jesse," she'd said, though her voice had wavered. "Then whose am I?" The question had hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Now, as the last light bled from the sky and the first stars punched through the gathering dark, Sarah heard the sound that had been living in her nightmares for 17 years, hoofbeats, coming hard up the canyon road. She knew before she saw them, knew it in the way the air seemed to tighten around her, in the sudden silence of the evening birds. Jesse emerged from the barn, his hand already resting on the colt at his hip, his eyes finding hers across the yard. 5 riders crested the ridge, silhouettes against the bruised purple sky. They moved with purpose, with the weight of violence held barely in check. At their head rode a man Sarah had never seen but recognized instantly, the same build as Jesse, the same way of sitting a horse. Wade Hollister had come home. "Get inside, Sarah," Jesse called, his voice carrying that strange calm men get when they can smell gunpowder on the wind. But Sarah didn't move, couldn't move, because she'd spent 17 years preparing for this moment, and now that it had arrived, she realized she'd prepared for the wrong thing entirely. She'd thought she'd have to choose between the boy and the ghost of her husband. She'd never imagined she might have to choose between the boy and the man who'd taken everything from her, a man whose face was nothing but a mirror of the one she'd loved for 17 years. The riders pulled up at the edge of the property, their horses stamping and blowing. Wade Hollister dismounted slow, his spurs singing against the hardpan, his weathered face cracking into something that might have been a smile in another life. "That's far enough," Jesse called out, and his voice didn't shake, though Sarah could see the tremor in his left hand. Wade stopped, his eyes moving from his son to Sarah and back again. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel under wagon wheels. "Boy, I've come for you." "I'm not your boy," Jesse said. "Haven't been for 17 years. "Blood says different." Wade's hand drifted to his gun, casual as a man adjusting his hat. "Blood always says different." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't fallen in 2 months. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains, distant as memory, close as heartbreak. Sarah stepped off the porch, her boots finding the dust of the yard. Both men turned to look at her, the boy she'd raised and the man who'd destroyed her life. And in that moment, she saw the future splitting before her like forked lightning. Someone was going to die in Dry Creek tonight. The only question was who. Part 2. The Weight of Bullets. The standoff stretched like taffy in the summer heat. Sarah could feel her heartbeat in her throat, could taste copper on her tongue as if she'd already bitten through something soft and bleeding. "Sarah, get back," Jesse said again, but there was pleading in it now, the voice of a boy who'd scraped his knee and needed comfort, the voice she'd heard 10,000 times over, 10,000 small catastrophes. But Wade's eyes were on her now, and there was recognition there. Recognition, and something that looked almost like regret. "Sarah McKenna." He said her name like a prayer in a language he'd forgotten. "You got older." "We all did," she replied, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Some of us had the courtesy to do it above ground." A muscle jumped in Wade's jaw. Behind him, his men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. The air crackled with the promise of violence. That peculiar electricity that comes when too many loaded guns occupy the same space. "I didn't come here for you," Wade said, though his eyes hadn't left her face. "I came for what's mine." "He's not yours." The words were out before Sarah could stop them. "He hasn't been yours since you left him bleeding in my barn." Something flickered across Wade's face, surprise maybe, or pain. He glanced at Jesse, and for the first time, Sarah saw uncertainty in the killer's eyes. "He told you." "He didn't have to." Sarah took another step forward, closer to Jesse, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, the coiled spring tension of a man preparing to die. "You think a boy that age could hide a bullet wound? Could hide the nightmares? The way he'd flinch every time a door slammed?" Wade's hand fell away from his gun. The gesture was small, but it rippled through his men like wind through wheat. Confusion flickered across their faces. "I was coming back for him," Wade said, and there was something broken in his voice now, something that sounded almost human. "That day, I was coming back, but the posse was on my tail and I couldn't lead them to him." "So you left him to die?" Jesse's voice cut through the gathering darkness like a knife. "Left him to die or get found. Didn't matter which to you." "I thought," Wade started, then stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought someone would take you in, get you to a doctor. I didn't think she'd be the one." Jesse finished the sentence, and there was wonder in it, and anger, and something that might have been grief for a childhood that never was. The thunder was closer now. Sarah could smell the rain coming. That peculiar petrichor scent of water on parched earth. She thought of baptism, of washing clean, of all the ways water could mean rebirth or drowning depending on how deep you went. "Why'd you do it?" Wade asked suddenly, and Sarah realized he was talking to her. Why'd you save him? After what I did to Thomas? The question hung in the air like a noose. Sarah felt the weight of 17 years pressing down on her shoulders, 17 years of asking herself the same question in the dark hours before dawn. Because he was a child, she said finally. Because I looked at him and saw someone who didn't choose his father any more than I chose mine. Because... She paused, her voice catching. Because killing him wouldn't have brought Thomas back. Would have just put more blood in the ground. Wade stared at her like she was speaking in tongues. Behind him, his men exchanged uneasy glances. You're saying you forgave me? Wade's voice was barely a whisper. No. The word came out hard as iron. I'm saying I chose not to let your sin poison another soul. There's a difference. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard in stark white light. In that frozen moment, Sarah saw everything with terrible clarity. Wade Hollister, older and worn, his face carved by years on the run but still recognizable as the man Jesse would become. Jesse himself, young and straight-backed, his hand steady on his gun, every line of him screaming protector, and herself, caught between them like a woman drowning between two shores. I'm taking the boy, Wade said, and his hand drifted back to his weapon. I don't want trouble, Sarah, but I'm taking my son. No? Jesse's voice rang out clear as a church bell. You're not. Wade's face hardened. That's not your choice to make. It's exactly my choice. Jesse stepped forward, putting himself between Sarah and his father. You gave up the right to call me son when you left me bleeding in that barn, when you killed a good man for money, when you rode away and didn't look back. I looked back, Wade said, and there was anguish in it, raw and terrible. Every day for 17 years, I looked back. But you never came home. Jesse's voice was steady now, certain. She did. She came to that barn and found me and patched me up and gave me a home when she had every reason to put a bullet in my head. So you tell me, Wade Hollister, who's got the right to call me son? The question cracked across the yard like a whip. Wade's hand twitched toward his gun, and Sarah saw the moment crystallizing, saw the future narrowing to a single point where guns would clear leather and blood would water the dust, and 17 years of something precious would end in fire and smoke. Wait, she heard herself say. Both men turned to look at her. The wind had died completely now, leaving nothing but the terrible stillness that comes before the storm breaks. There's another way, Sarah said, though she didn't know what it was yet. Only that there had to be. That she hadn't spent 17 years pouring love into a broken boy just to watch him die in the dirt. What way? Wade asked. Sarah looked at Jesse, at the boy who'd become a man in her care. Who'd learned to be gentle when his blood screamed for violence, who'd chosen every day to be better than his father's legacy. You want your son? She said to Wade. Then prove you deserve him. Part 3. The Rain That Washes Clean. Wade Hollister's laugh was bitter as alkali water. Prove I deserve him? Woman, he's my blood. That's all the proof required. Blood's easy, Sarah shot back. Any man can spill it. Take something more to earn the right to call someone yours. She turned to Jesse, her voice softening. Put the gun down, son. Sarah, trust me. Please. The moment stretched taut as a hangman's rope. Then slowly, Jesse's hand moved away from his Colt. The gesture rippled through the assembled men like wind through grass. Wade watched his son with something like hunger in his eyes. What are you proposing? Sarah walked forward until she stood in the no-man's land between father and son, between past and future. You want Jesse, you can have him. But first you answer for what you did. You face what you've been running from all these years. I'm not going to prison, Wade said flatly. I'd die first. Not prison, Sarah said. Me. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Wade's brow furrowed in confusion. I don't understand. You killed my husband, Sarah said, and her voice didn't shake, though her hands did. Shot him down in the street like a dog. You want your son? Then you answer to the woman you widowed. You stand there and you tell me why. You look me in the eye and you give me the truth you owe me. And when you're done, if Jesse still wants to go with you, I won't stop him. Thunder rolled overhead, closer now. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, spotting the dust with dark circles. Sarah, no, Jesse started, but she held up a hand. This is my choice, Jesse. My closure. You've lived with your father's ghosts for 17 years. Let me lay mine to rest. Wade dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a finality that sounded like judgment. He walked forward until he stood before Sarah, close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the weight of years that had worn him down to something almost human. You want the truth? His voice was rough as burlap. The truth is, I was hired. $300 to put Thomas McKenna in the ground. I didn't know him, didn't care to. I was young and stupid and convinced I was faster than I was righteous. Who hired you? Sarah demanded. Wade glanced away. Does it matter? It matters to me. The rain was falling harder now, plastering hair to faces, turning the dust to mud. Wade drew a breath that seemed to cost him something. Marcus Thornton said Thomas was cheating him on a land deal, said he needed it done quiet, done fast. Sarah felt the world tilt. Marcus Thornton, the banker who'd held the mortgage on her ranch, the man who'd called in the debt after Thomas died, then magnanimously offered to let her keep the property if she'd marry him. The proposal she'd refused, choosing poverty over his hands on her skin. I see, she said quietly. I didn't know Thomas was a good man, Wade continued, and there was genuine remorse in his voice now. Didn't know he had a wife, a homestead, a life worth living. I just saw $300 and a clear shot. By the time I learned who he was, what I'd taken, it was too late. The money was spent, and I had blood on my hands that wouldn't wash clean. And Jesse? Wade's face twisted. His mother died birthing him. I was all he had. I was riding hard after the shooting and the boy was slowing me down. He was scared, crying. I thought, his voice broke. I thought if I hid him somewhere safe, somewhere the posse wouldn't look, I could come back for him after the heat died down. But when I went back 3 days later, he was gone. I searched for weeks, thought he'd died, and it was one more sin on my account. The rain was a steady drumbeat now, washing the dust from their faces, running down their necks like tears. You made choices. Wade Hollister, Sarah said. Bad ones. Choices that took my husband from me and scarred your son in ways that'll never fully heal. But I made choices too. I chose to save Jesse when I found him. Chose to raise him when I could have turned him in. Chose mercy when the world expected vengeance. She turned to look at Jesse, standing there in the rain with his father's face and her hard-won gentleness, and felt her heart crack open one more time. I raised you to be better than him, she said, and you are. You're twice the man he was. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve to know where you came from. Doesn't mean you don't have the right to hear your father's truth and make your own peace with it. Sarah. Jesse's voice was rough with unshed tears. I'm not your blood, Jesse. Never was. But I've loved you like you were. And that love doesn't come with chains. If you want to ride out with him to know your father, to understand where you came from, I won't stop you. All I ask is that you remember where you chose to become who you are. The silence that followed was broken only by the rain and the distant rumble of thunder rolling away toward the eastern horizon. Jesse stood there, water streaming down his face, looking from Sarah to Wade and back again. He's my father, Jesse said finally, his voice breaking. "But you're my mother, the only one I've ever known, the only one who chose me." He walked past Wade without looking at him, stopped in front of Sarah. In the rain-dimmed light, she could see the boy she'd found in the barn, fever-bright and dying, and the man he'd fought so hard to become. "I don't need to know where I came from," Jessie said. "I know where I belong." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Behind Jessie, Wade stood frozen, his face a mask of loss and something that might have been understanding. "You sure, boy?" Wade asked quietly. "Blood calls to blood, you'll always wonder." Jessie turned to face his father. "I did wonder. Spent years wondering if you'd come back, if you'd want me, if I was worth coming back for. But she never made me wonder about that. Not once in 17 years. So yeah, I'm sure." Wade nodded slowly, accepting the judgment. He looked at Sarah, and in his eyes she saw something like gratitude mixed with the grief. "You raised him right," he said. "Better than I could have. Better than I deserved." "He raised himself right," Sarah replied. "I just gave him the space to do it." Wade mounted his horse, water streaming from his hat brim. His men gathered around him, uncertain, waiting for orders that would never come. He looked down at Jessie one last time, memorizing the face of the son he'd lost twice, once to his own cowardice and once to a woman's courage. "If you ever need anything," he started. "I won't," Jessie interrupted, but not unkindly. "But I hope you find what you're looking for out there. I hope you find peace." Wade nodded. "That's more grace than I deserve." He touched his hat brim to Sarah. "Ma'am, I can't ask your forgiveness, and I wouldn't insult you by trying. But I want you to know, what I took from you, you paid back 100-fold. You saved my son when I couldn't. That's a debt I'll carry to my grave." "Then carry it well," Sarah said. "Let it make you better than you were." The riders turned and headed back up the canyon road, their forms growing indistinct in the rain and gathering dark. Sarah and Jessie stood together in the yard, watching them disappear into the storm, neither one speaking until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. "You think he'll be all right?" Jessie asked finally. "I think he'll be what he chooses to be," Sarah replied. "Same as you. Same as all of us." Jessie was quiet for a long moment, rain streaming down his face. "Why'd you do it, Sarah? Really? After everything he took from you?" She looked at the boy she'd raised. No, the man standing beside her, strong and true and good, and felt the last of her ghosts slip away into the rain. "Because I'd already lost one man I loved," she said. "I wasn't about to lose another, even if he was just a scared boy in a barn who didn't know he was worth saving yet." "I wasn't worth it," Jessie said quietly. "Not then." "You were always worth it," Sarah said fiercely. "You just had to grow into understanding why." They turned and walked back to the house together, leaving the past to drown in the rain. Behind them, the storm washed the blood from the yard, scoured the dust from the porch rails, baptized the earth in water that had been 17 years coming. In the morning, the sun would rise on Dry Creek like it always did, merciless and bright and new. The town would wake to the smell of rain-washed sage and muddy streets and the faint possibility of redemption. And in a weathered homestead on the edge of forever, a woman and the boy she'd chosen to save would sit on the porch with their coffee, watching the dawn break over the mountains, bound not by blood, but by something stronger. The choice to love when the world demanded vengeance, to build when it would have been easier to destroy, to believe that even the most broken things could be made whole again, given time and rain and the steady work of grace. The past was buried. The future stretched before them, uncertain as always, but faced together. And in the end, that was enough. In the Old West, justice wasn't always found at the end of a rope or the barrel of a gun. Sometimes, in the quiet spaces between vengeance and mercy, between blood and choice, between the family we're born to and the family we make, sometimes that's where the truest justice lives, in the heart of a woman who chose to save rather than destroy, in the courage of a boy who chose to become more than his father's sins, in the rain that finally comes to wash the dust from our eyes and help us see each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. Some debts are paid in blood, but the deepest ones are paid in grace.